Well, hello and a warm welcome to Ask the Leader, the last in our series. We're putting the leaders of the SNP, the Conservatives, Labour and the Liberal Democrats on the spot all throughout this week. They've all been facing questions from a live studio audience here in Glasgow, and I've been trying to press them for the answers. If you'd like to join tonight's debate on social media, the hashtag is Ask the Leader. Now, you may know we've already heard this week from Willie Rennie, Kezia Dugdale and Ruth Davidson. Tonight, it's the turn of the First Minister and Scottish National Party leader, Nicola Sturgeon. And the first question for her comes from Sheila Farnsworth. Sheila.
Hi, thank you. Why do you want Scotland to become independent from the UK, with which it's geographically linked, only to become dependent on the EU?
Is that a fair summary of your response to Brexit?
I believe Scotland should be independent, not because we should be separate from the rest of the United Kingdom, but that we should be on an equal footing to England, Wales and Northern Ireland. We should be in a partnership of equals. Scotland will always be part of the British Isles, but I think we should have responsibility for the direction of our country. In terms of the second part of your question, which is a very good question, and it's one that I get asked often, why do you want to be independent and part of the European Union? And the fact of the matter is, and I think when we think about this, we can see this very clearly. The European Union is an organisation made up of independent countries. So France and Germany, Spain, Portugal, they're all independent countries, but they come together to cooperate on issues that in the modern world no individual country can tackle on its own. And a very topical example, I suppose, of one of those issues is climate change. No country these days, despite what President Trump appears to think, can tackle climate change on its own. So on that, and the other aspect of the European Union is the single trading market. We have a market in the single market that's 8 times the size of our UK market. So we've got many more customers to sell our goods to. And I think Scotland and indeed the UK should be part of that, cooperating, but cooperating on the basis of being an independent country.
OK, I want to talk more about your approach to Brexit in a moment,
Sure.
but I'll come back to Sheila and perhaps others in the audience. What's your own view?
Well, I definitely don't want Scotland to become independent. However, I do want to stay in the EU as well. So,
but as part of the UK,
Yeah,
in
yes,
this case.
yes.
Gentleman in the back row with the yellowy tie.
Hi there. I can see why you'd want to leave Britain, obviously, but what exactly gives you the mandate for us to have another referendum? I mean, we voted on it previously, and we voted on Europe last year, and the question wasn't, do you want Scotland to leave Britain?
Mm-hmm. Again, very good and fair questions to me, and this gives me the opportunity to set out the answer, I hope, clearly. We fought, and you'll recall this because it is only a year ago, we fought an election to the Scottish Parliament. That was just before the European referendum. And the manifesto that I fought that election on last year said that if we had a scenario, which I hoped didn't arise, where Scotland voted to stay in the EU, but the rest of the UK voted to leave, and Scotland faced being taken out against our will, I thought in those circumstances Scotland should have a choice about its future. Now, that scenario arose. The SNP won that election. Now, my position on Brexit and a choice for Scotland is that I don't think we should face that choice now, but at the end of the Brexit process, when we know what that deal looks like, when we know what the implications are, I think Scotland should have a choice about its future.
OK,
because
but at this election, you are proposing, or you've resurrected the idea of some kind of compromise deal where the UK or Scotland would be allowed to stay in the single market. In those circumstances, you say you would accept Brexit. Why have you resurrected that plan?
Well, I think it comes directly to Sheila's point here, because I'm very aware of the fact that there are many people in Scotland who don't want independence, but who don't want to leave the European Union either. I'm also very aware of the fact that the UK is made up of 4 nations. 2 of them voted to stay in the EU and 2 of them voted to leave. So in the immediate aftermath of the EU referendum, I thought it was quite important to try to find some compromise ground. And the Scottish Government published a paper in December last year that said, OK, we accept reluctantly that we leave in the EU, but let's try and find a way of staying in the single market. Because leaving the single market for Scotland will put tens of thousands of jobs on the line.
OK, but that proposal was rejected
Sure.
by the UK government, and at that point you said that was why we had to have another independence referendum. So why resurrect the idea
Theresa May
now?
called an election. She refused to countenance those proposals. She refused to give them any serious consideration, which I think was regrettable. But then she called an election. I think she might be regretting it now, but she called an election, which gives me the opportunity to say to people like Sheila and others, OK, you don't support independence, but back the SNP to strengthen our hand to try to get a compromise and get Scotland's voice heard in these negotiations.
OK, so if Theresa May was still Prime Minister after this election, let's imagine for some reason she has a change of mind and decides to go down the route of keeping Scotland in the single market, would in those circumstances you take independence and the referendum off the table?
What I've said is I think at the end of this process Scotland should have a choice. But my job in trying to persuade people in Scotland to vote for independence, I guess, would be more difficult if we'd found a compromise that kept Scotland in the single market.
So would you take it off the table? I mean, previously you said if she went down this route with you, you would
I think it's important. And I would say this to people even who oppose independence and would vote against independence in this scenario. At the end of this process, because none of us know what the outcome of the Brexit process is going to be. We heard Theresa May, I think earlier this week, herself talk about how disastrous it will be for jobs and public finances if it goes wrong. Now, if I was to say Scotland shouldn't get a choice, that would be me deciding single-handedly what Scotland's future should be.
But why on earth would Theresa May agree to what you call a compromise if you're not going to change your position on independence?
Because she might think if she came up with a compromise that kept Scotland in the single market, she'd have more chance saying to people in Scotland you shouldn't support independence. So I think we should have a choice, but I've always wanted to try to find that compromise ground because, and Sheila's a good example of this, there are many people out there who don't agree with me on independence but do agree with me on the European Union. And I'm conscious of the fact that although I support independence, I'm First Minister of the country and I have got a duty to try to find ground that brings as many people together as possible.
Okay. Let me bring in a couple of voices from the audience, the lady in the front row and then the gentleman with the striped shirt in the back.
Hi, First Minister. You were talking about bringing Scotland together as a country and you wanted to having another independence referendum. But what I don't understand is that for 10 years SNP has been in power, but we still have, in 2017, we've still got poverty in parts of Glasgow. When my dad was in Easterhouse, when he was younger, there's still poverty there. We've got a high deficit rate. We have lack of funding for NHS services, for charity services, for policing. The education system is an absolute abomination, really. There's people leaving school now that are illiterate. And you're saying that you come across as if independence is going to fix all that. Why can't, after the 10 years, you fix those problems now and then look to independence? I'm not totally against it.
Gentleman in the back, I'll let you come back in.
The negativity that surrounds Brexit is all over the place, but somehow, if Brexit ended up having a good outcome for Scotland, would you then take independence off the table?
My job would be more difficult because it's often said to me, we had the independence referendum in 2014, why are you bringing this forward so soon? And the truth is, without Brexit, we wouldn't be sitting here talking about this so soon after the last one. So if Brexit, and don't get me wrong, I hope Brexit's not a disaster. I don't want to leave the EU, but now that the UK as a whole has voted for that, I really hope that a deal is struck that isn't disastrous. But I can't suspend my critical faculties. I think there is a real risk that the outcome of this will be very difficult for us.
Answer to the other point?
Yes, sorry. I don't sit here and say to you that independence is a magic solution to everything, nor do I say that supporting independence lets me and my government off the hook in terms of the issues you raise. We've got challenges in Scotland, like every other country, but in many of... Just take a couple of the points you made there. Take policing, for example, that's been obviously very topical with the tragic events of the last couple of weeks. In Scotland, we've not had reductions in frontline police officers. In England, we've seen 20,000 police officers...
Proposed, though, aren't they?
Well, the police are looking ahead to the changing nature of crime with cybercrime, but we've maintained police numbers. On education, I've been very frank that we have challenges in education,
and we might get some
people,
of those in a little while. We've been talking about the Constitution, Brexit and independence. A follow-up question from Ali Salek. Ali.
Good evening, First Minister. My question to you is that would we definitely be having another Scottish independence referendum in the timescales you proposed?
The timescale you proposed.
And also, what would happen if the next UK Prime Minister says no to the request, regardless of the outcome of the general election. So how would you ensure that the voice of the Scottish Parliament prevails?
OK, so the timescale, just remind people that you proposed, is the autumn of next year through to the spring of 2019.
The reason for that particular timescale is that that is when, right now, the Prime Minister is saying the Brexit process will end. She says, lots of people are sceptical about this, but she says the deal, not just about the divorce from the EU, but the future relationship will be clear before the UK leaves in the spring of 2019.
But you've been suggesting in recent days, have you not, that you might need to be more flexible, you might need to be prepared to wait?
I can't remember if you were there the day I set out this timescale, but I said that then because the point of principle for me is not an arbitrary date in the calendar. The point of principle is at the end of the process.
When's that?
I can't answer that question just now because I'm not in charge of the Brexit process.
OK, but the Conservatives might say that it was years down the line because when they talk about that...
Sorry, I misunderstood your question. You said when the terms of the deal are known, when people can look at the Brexit deal and understand what it means for the country...
Your opponents would say the whole thing needs to play out and bed
my
in
opponents would say,
and put it down
Ruth
the line
Davidson said
years.
35 years' time or something. When people... Informed choice is important. So I'm not saying now, I'm not saying before people have that choice.
OK, so in terms of that process, when is the absolute latest that you are prepared to accept as a timescale?
When people know the terms of the deal.
So now, is that any later than the spring of 2019?
Well, if that was going to be later than then, as I think I said on the day, we would have to factor that in because that's the point of principle at the end of the process when people can see the terms of what they'd be voting on.
And what if the UK government does keep saying no? Because this isn't really up to you, is it? You're wanting them to give you the power and they don't want to give it. If they say no, that's it then, isn't it?
This, I think, comes down to a point of democratic principle as well. I mean, I'm very aware that lots of people passionately oppose independence and I respect that, although I disagree with it. Many other people passionately support independence. But surely one point of agreement, again trying to find the common ground, is that whatever Scotland's future turns out to be, it should be decided here in Scotland by the Scottish people, not dictated by a Westminster Prime Minister, whoever that Prime Minister happens to be.
Okay,
and I think that's the important point of principle.
If this standoff continues, you were going to tell us your next move in a statement to Parliament after the Easter break. What's happened to that?
Well, then Theresa May called an election and I've been rather preoccupied fighting.
Yeah, but isn't that the perfect time to share with people what you will do if the UK government
isn't it important to let people have their say? So Theresa May says no, and I'm not saying now. When you listen carefully to what Theresa May and I are saying, actually, there's not a huge difference there. She's saying not now, I'm saying not now, but when the process is there. But
okay,
people have the opportunity
to know what you will do if the answer continues.
Well, the first thing I'll do, I'll reflect on the result of the election. Let people have their say. We've got an election in less than a week's time now.
Okay. Might Jeremy Corbyn do a deal with you?
Well, I still, despite the narrowing of the polls, and the polls are narrowing south of the border, I still think the chances are Theresa May and the Tories will win this election. I don't like that prospect, but I think it is the case. But what we now have the prospect of in Scotland, I think, is keeping the Tories in check, because whether or not she increases her majority could be down to the outcome in Scotland. So if we don't want to have a bigger majority, we shouldn't vote Tory.
Well, listen, that leads me neatly to our next question, which has been submitted from home by Elshan Fatahani. And Elshan says, why does the SNP claim that it will stand up for Scotland at Westminster, but they won't stand up for education in Holyrood with falling literacy and numeracy rates? We'll come to the education part of that in a moment. But in terms of your role at Westminster, I mean, even if you had all 59 seats in Scotland, what can you actually achieve? Because you're not aspiring to be in government.
No, but I think even the SNP's harshest critic would probably concede that over the past 2 years, we've not been the official opposition in the House of Commons, but we've been the effective opposition while Labour have torn themselves apart. It's been Angus Robertson, week after week after week, who has pinned the Prime Minister down at Prime Minister's questions. It's been SNP MPs, taking up a whole range of issues from, Alison Thewlis on the rape clause and the 2-child tax credit policy, through to Mary Black on fighting the case for WASPy women. It was Stuart Hosey that first picked up on the national insurance increase in the Chancellor's budget, which then forced a U-turn on that policy. So
as I understand it, Theresa May U-turned on that when she realised her own backbenches.
Theresa made U-turns on most things, as far as I can see.
I mean, in terms of the bigger picture, I mean, these are issues you've certainly raised, and I don't deny that, but you stand at this election on an anti-austerity ticket. You stood 2 years ago to try and end austerity. How did that go?
Well, you're getting kind of quite close here to, and I know you're only putting questions to me, but if we accept the fact that Scotland can't make any difference at Westminster, then, that raises some pretty fundamental questions. I think we can make a big...
But you don't accept that. I think you can make a difference in the current system.
I think we can make a difference. I think we have made a difference. And, if you have Conservative MPs from Scotland, they will, be rubber stamps for whatever Theresa May wants to do. SNP MPs will stand up for Scotland and fight Scotland's corner.
Yeah,
that's the difference.
I'm trying to get to what you can actually achieve. I mean, 2 years ago, here's something else that you were keen on at that time. Let's take a look.
We will seek agreement that the Scottish Parliament should move to full financial responsibility. And as part of a phased transition, we will prioritise early devolution of powers over employment policy, including the minimum wage, welfare, business taxes, national insurance and equality policy. The powers we need here in Scotland to create jobs, grow revenues and lift our people out of poverty.
You haven't achieved any of that, have you?
But we're currently in the process of setting up a Scottish social security agency.
But those were powers that were promised after the referendum in 2014, not since your landslide in 2015.
We continue to argue for these, and what
have you actually done to seek that package of powers over the last 2 years?
We've had we regularly press for powers. So the compromise proposals that I talked about around Brexit put forward a whole range of powers, including immigration and many of the things in there that we think should be devolved, because that actually further devolution would make it more possible for Scotland to protect its interests in the Brexit scenario.
OK, we'll take a couple of points from members of the audience. A lady in the back.
Thank you. First Minister, you talk about the devolution of benefits. So some of the benefits include DLA and PIP,
that's disability
living allowance and the personal independence payment. My husband and I went through a horrific process last year, transferring to that benefit. And I know many families, we didn't lose out, we were lucky. But other families are losing out, and the longer that you delay taking on the competence for these powers, the more families are losing out. People are losing finances, they're losing income, they're losing mobility cars, their means of getting out and about. So my question to you is, how long are you going to delay this? And how do we make sure the families who have lost out are supported better than they are just now?
Well, firstly, we're not delivering this. We have to. We're going to take on responsibility for making more payments to individuals in Scotland in 1 week than the Scottish Government is currently responsible for making in an entire year. Payments to about 4 million people when you take all of the different benefits involved. So we have to be sure we can make those payments reliably so that people who rely on these benefits get the money that they're entitled to. So we're creating right now what will become the biggest public sector agency that's ever been created in Scotland since the Scottish Parliament was established. Now, I would love to say that we can do that overnight, but we can't. We've got to make sure that's done properly.
And it's not going to be like the farm payments IT system, is it?
Well, the reason we've got to take time to do this properly is so that we can make sure that there is no question at all that people get the payments that they're entitled to.
But it's interesting because...
But, can I finish this point, Glenn? Because, Angela Constance, the Cabinet Secretary responsible here, made a statement in Parliament just this week about this, where she started to lay out the first benefits that will be paid through the new agency. So carers allowance, increasing that to the rate of job seekers allowance is one of the first things we'll do. The new early years benefit to try to help tackle child poverty.
But some of the new powers won't be in place till, the end of this parliamentary term at Holyrood?
It was always going to be an implementation over the course of this Parliament. But we also, two further things I would say here. As you know, we are building into this agency and this whole approach to benefits a humane system, because one of the things I loathe about the current system, and you've got direct experience of it, is how it stigmatises people who are reliant on benefits and almost treats them like criminals. We want to have dignity at the heart of the system.
I'm going to let the question come in very briefly, and then I'm afraid I'm going to have to move on to another question.
I absolutely take that on board, and I understand how complex it is from someone who's part of the system. I think for me, the issue remains that whilst this is happening and while we set up the infrastructure for this, is that families are becoming destitute. That carers will lose carers allowance because they're losing PIP, and so ultimately, what transfers to Scotland could be a lot less because people have actually lost out. So we're in a situation where families are struggling.
Okay, I know that, which is why we've done.
Very much, and I really do need to move on. Okay. The second part of the question that we raised a short time ago was about education and falling literacy and numeracy standards. I know you don't deny that there are problems. The question is why?
Over the past few years, we've introduced a new curriculum, the Curriculum for Excellence, which the OECD, the international organisation that often looks at these things, has said is the right thing to do. But we've recognised that there are perhaps part of that curriculum where we need a greater focus. Literacy and numeracy is one of those.
But you've been in power for 10 years.
And we've introduced that. We've been in power for 10 years, and there is a lot of improvement in Scottish education. So there are more
literacy and numeracy standards are slipping in the international rankings.
But let me also say there are more young people who leave school these days with qualifications. The gap between the richest and the poorest young people has almost halved in the 10 years we've been in power. There are more young people going to university.
Some young people have had their entire school career under the SNP, and at the end of that, standards are going backwards in numeracy and literacy.
If you take the PISA study that's often quoted here...
That's the international study, yeah.
Absolutely, there are challenges in that. The other survey that we published recently... if you take second-year pupils, it tests and assesses those pupils against the standards that they're meant to meet, not in second year but in third year. We've got other data that shows by the time young people are in third year, more than 80% of them are meeting those standards. So, we are making progress and there are improvements. But
but after 10 years, I mean, if you lot were really good at this, standards would be increasing year on year.
In many areas of our education system, that is the case. You've got more young people leaving school with good qualifications. You've got more young people
now embarking
going
on a programme of what your education secretary says is radical reform? Shouldn't that have happened years ago?
Because we've introduced a new curriculum, which took a number of years to do. But I do believe in politics, and sometimes this is not the standard approach. Where you have challenges, be honest about those challenges. So we have embarked on a programme through our National Improvement Framework, through our Attainment Challenge. So head teachers right now have got additional resources directly in their own hands to try to do more to tackle these issues.
Lots of hands up. Lady on this side in the orange jacket, and then the lady on the other side in the white.
Hi, I am a teacher. I just actually recently retired after 37 years in teaching maths. And over the last 10 years, I'll tell you why you have went down. First of all, we had a system at the beginning of 2006 where class sizes for maths and English in S1 and S2 were at 20, and it was great. We actually saw an increase in the PISA results at that point. We were able to deal with children who had individualised needs. A couple of years later, SNP came into power, and the authority I worked with became SNP as well. The first thing they did was they increased class sizes. We went from 20 average S1 and S2 to 33. Our neighbouring authority, they remained at 20, and by the way, they're always up there in the top.
Can you say which part of the country this was?
I was in Renfrewshire.
Okay.
And next door was East Renfrewshire, who, because my family worked there.
Do you think class size is a relevant factor in terms of overall performance?
Totally relevant. The SNP Council in Renfrewshire at that time decreased the number of teachers. They took away our support in classroom assistance.
So how do you think
we were decimated compared to East Renfrewshire.
Marks out of 10 then?
Oh, they're 2 out of 10.
Okay.
And children...
Take another point, and then I'll bring Nicola Sturgeon back in.
I speak as a head teacher. Over the last 10 years, since you came into power, every single year there's been cuts in budgets, there's been cuts in staffing, there's been cuts in every service that supports us in education. And obviously austerity is, that's been part of it, I accept that. But you can't expect that children will make the same level of attainment if you don't fund them. And certainly class sizes is the main things. But I think that teachers and head teachers are not consulted directly enough. I think most recently what has happened with the Pupil Equity Fund and the National Improvement Framework, yes, there are things happening now, but we've had 10 years of this, and in this 10 years, children have lost opportunities. And I think that's been a really sad business, that here we are today with such a loss of attainment for our young people.
Okay, First Minister.
I'm sitting here listening to a former teacher, and I think you said a current head teacher, so I'm not going to sit here and argue with your experience. I've got to listen to that experience, and my job is to respond to that and make sure that if there are things we've not got right, we get them right now. You mentioned the Pupil Equity Fund. That is a very deliberate, targeted initiative to get the resources into the hands, not of councils, but of head teachers directly. I spoke to a head teacher in Eastern Bartonshire at the weekend who told me he thought that was the most transformational thing that had happened in his time as a head teacher. We certainly should and must consult with those in the teaching profession, because you're at the front line of this. I'm absolutely, there is nothing that we will talk about tonight that I'm more determined to make sure we do than tackle some of the challenges we've got. Okay. On behalf of pupils and teachers all over the country, I don't think we should sit here and say everything in Scottish education is dreadful, because the evidence does not bear that out. But where there are challenges, we must address them.
I want to ask one.
Fund to help these schools. They can't use it to get teachers because there are no teachers out there, and you're reducing the opportunity to train more teachers. Next year's going to be 700 less teachers. I can't understand that, because you've already accepted that there's not enough teachers.
We're increasing the number of students going into teachers. So this year there's 371, I think it is, additional places at teacher training. We've increased places at teacher training courses every year now for the last 6 years, and will continue to do that. Teacher recruitment challenges are not unique to Scotland. They're almost a global challenge right now. We're also, the General Teaching Council is looking at potential different routes into teaching, so that we might be able to attract different kinds, getting perhaps retired teachers back into
a quick follow-up
the classroom.
on that.
From the way you're looking at me there, I don't think you're up for that challenge.
Let me ask you a quick follow-up, because it's reported today in the Times Educational Supplement that the government in Scotland is prepared to let organisations like Teach First apply for contracts to fast-track people into the system, bypassing the normal routes. Is that correct?
Well, people would have to have a teaching qualification, but we are about to go out to tender, because we've got to do that, for an additional different route into teaching, and Teach First with other organisations would be able to apply for that. OK, I'm going to squeeze in one final question. I'm sorry for those who wanted to come in on education. Last one from our contributor, Stephen Young.
Good evening, First Minister. Would a small tax rise be something you would consider if the money was ring-fenced and put into the NHS?
We will always consider these things. We took decisions around...
You're quite reluctant to use your tax powers, don't you?
Well, no, I'm not reluctant to use powers, but you've got to consider the impact of powers before you use them. So we decided not to raise the basic rate of income tax, because that hits low and middle income people. We are going into a period where inflation is rising and there's real pressure on the cost of living.
There's real pressure on the NHS too. It needs more money, doesn't it?
And we've put £3 billion more into the health service in the last few years, and we've got plans to put another £2 billion in over the next few years. But we took a decision not to give a tax cut to people on the higher rate of income tax, which has happened south of the border. So that creates extra revenue, because of the way our finances work, that we are investing in public services. So, of course, we'll continue to look at these things. But I think one of the big issues over the next couple of years, and it's kicking in already, is going to be the pressure on household incomes as inflation, partly because of the low value of the pound, goes up. Okay. So the public sector pay caps become a real issue, and we've said we'll lift that cap because of that.
Sorry to interrupt, we're really short of time, but a quick couple of follow-ups on the NHS. Why are 1 in 4 GP surgeries short of a doctor?
Well, we're increasing the numbers going into medical training, and we've got initiatives underway to try to get more medical students into general practice. Again, it's a bit like teaching. Scotland's not unique here in terms of struggling to attract people into certain areas.
It's been in power for 10 years.
Absolutely, and we've got 12,000 more people working in the health service, and that includes more doctors, more nurses, more allied health professionals. But, we have challenges, and I'm not going to sit here and say we don't. Some of those are not unique to Scotland, but we're determined to make sure we get on top of them.
I need to draw this to a close, because we're at the end of our half hour, and I guess you need to get home to watch Theresa May and Jeremy Corbyn on the television.
Must I?
Well, a preparation for your own appearance on Sunday.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much indeed for being here, for your contributions. Thanks to Nicola Sturgeon. That's the end of Ask the Leaders. Enjoy your Friday evening.